In 1994, Yu Suzuki made a trip to China to research and gather material for his upcoming sequel to one of Japan's most groundbreaking and highest-grossing arcade games of all time, Virtua Fighter. Suzuki recalls, "So first of all, I went to the famous Forbidden City, as seen in The Last Emperor, and gathered various textured data. Things like the Forbidden City's walls, the balustrades, and the structure of the Forbidden City itself. They all felt wonderfully fresh. And as I'm sure you can guess, in the upcoming Virtua Fighter 2 I'm planning to use the Model 2 employed in Daytona, USA, and applied textures. My primary objectives for this trip were to track down the esoteric secrets of Bajiquan and to visit the grave of Li Shiwen, a famous Bajiquan martial artist. But along the way I also saw a lot of other places and things such as Shaolin Temple and other forms of martial arts. Virtua Fighter 1 had an extremely short length of development, so towards the end of development I was going flat out to give each character a distinct personality, and I wasn't able to perfect certain aspects. I'd like to ground Virtua Fighter 2 more in the environment and era where each of these martial arts were cultivated, and carry through the original 8 characters in a way that aims for greater reality. In Virtua Fighter 2 I'll be trying to do the things that weren't possible under the program structure of Virtua Fighter 1, and thanks to the hardware performance being more than twice as good, I think we'll be able to realise speedier and more intelligent movement." The original Virtua Fighter had pioneered the use of 3D polygons in a 1v1 fighting game, and it became one of Japan's highest grossing arcade games of all time. To realise his vision for the game's sequel, Suzuki would need new hardware. The Sega Model 2 came into existence when General Electric approached Sega with some real-time texture mapping ASICs, which led to a commercial partnership in August '92, and the board took almost a year to produce. The most noticeable improvement of the Model 2 over the Model 1 is texture mapping, which enables polygons to be painted with bitmap images, as opposed to being limited monotone flat shading that the previous board supported. The Model 2 also introduced the use of texture filtering and texture anti-aliasing, as well as trilinear filtering. It was the most powerful game system of its time, equivalent to the power of a PC graphics card in 1998, 5 years after the Model 2's release. Suzuki explains, "At the time, motion capture technology was used only in healthcare, and we were the first to apply that technology in a game. 3 large companies that provided military simulations were the only ones that were using texture mapping chips. But I had an idea, so I approached them, thinking, here goes nothing. So there I was, this guy from a Japanese video game company, asking to use the latest, top secret technology the US military had to offer, and they were like, okay, let's do it." With the collapse of the Soviet Union, America's military simulation industry was placed in the private sector, so the timing was perfect. However, our budget for procuring a chip was only around 5,000 yen, and the chip they had was in a jet fighter simulator worth several billion yen, so settling on a price proved to be quite difficult. They said they could offer a cheaper mass-produced chip that was only 200 million yen, so all we had to do was make up the difference. In hindsight, the Sega Model 2 was a ludicrous proposition, cutting-edge military-grade hardware used for the purposes of an arcade game. This is the unique kind of batshit insanity that made me fall in love with Sega and Yu Suzuki's AM2 department back in the 90s. The results were simply astonishing. The Model 2 made everything else look shit.
Fight! 1, ready, go!
Blue skies, super crisp, beautifully stylized visuals, silky smooth motion captured animations, and fucking ludicrously awesome soft rock soundtrack was like a bolt of lightning to the forehead. This was sun-drenched kinetic arcade action distilled to its absolute purest form. Virtua Fighter 2 was an irresistible force. It's also filled with the obsessive and idiosyncratic detail that Yu Suzuki is synonymous with. Take the neck movements, for example. In Virtua Fighter 2, the fighters always keep their eyes locked on their opponent and will move their heads to maintain eye contact. It might not sound like much today, but given the constraints of the hardware at that time, and the fact that none of this had ever been done before, this was some next level, auteur-like lunacy. Similarly, it's reported that AM2 had a specific team devoted to finger movement. Haha, they don't make him like this no more. Momentum-based damage was introduced, along with the ability for some characters to sidestep attacks and thus make better use of their 3D surroundings. And it featured over 2,000 moves, almost 3 times as many as the first game. I love the super stylized visuals of the original game. Surprisingly, Virtua Fighter 2 in fact uses fewer polygons, but they're vastly more detailed due to the introduction of texture mapping. Along with the fully 3D backdrops and the 60 frames per second frame rate, it made the original look like a tech demo. I mean, look at this thing. Are there any early 3D games whose visuals have aged as gracefully as this? I think not. Man, the arcades were awesome in those days. Those high-end arcade games from Sega and Namco were the absolute bleeding edge of tech, and in the arcades you could experience the kind of stuff you couldn't even dream of playing back at home. However, in the case of Virtua Fighter 2, Sega had a damn good stab at doing just that.
Sega Saturn.
究極の 3D 格闘ゲーム、それがバーチャファイター2。
もっと強いやつと戦いたい。
Sega。
AM2's translation of the arcade version's mechanics and gameplay to the Sega Saturn is to all intents and purposes perfect, and despite the pretty vast discrepancy in power between Sega's home console and the mighty Model 2 board, they did a fine job with the graphics too, as you can see here. This was my first real experience of the game, selling my PlayStation at Christmas '96 and getting a Saturn with Virtua Fighter 2. And Sega Rally, and Christmas nights. It was free with the console. Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn was a wonder to behold, and is without a doubt one of the most graphically impressive games of the 32-bit era. Following on from the rushed and botched conversions of Daytona USA and the original Virtua Fighter, Sega had already lost ground to the PlayStation. Unfortunately, Virtua Fighter 2 wasn't nearly enough to stop Sony's runaway juggernaut from dominating the era, but it doesn't stop this game from being the finest 3D beat-em-up of its generation. I remember the journalists, including Digital Foundry's Richard "In the Here and Now" Ledbetter, no less, hyping up this game's many technical achievements, while mourning the loss of Shundee's crumbly old stone bridge, floating raft, and all the other 3D polygonal elements of the backgrounds. AM2 had to replace them with 2D images, utilising the Saturn's mighty 2D abilities to enable scaling, rotation, and parallax techniques. It was a bit of a bummer to lose this stuff, yes, but it was a necessary sacrifice, and in fairness, look at Tekken 2's static wallpaper backdrops in comparison. It also runs at an insane, for the time, resolution of 704 by 480. Higher in fact than the arcade's 496 by 384 medium resolution. It's true the signal had to be interlaced in order to be displayed on the bog standard 15 kHz CRT TVs of that time, but nevertheless, this game looked sharper than T-1000's Wing Wang.
I'm faster than lightning! Fight! 2, ready, go! Ha!
I played Virtua Fighter 2 for hours upon hours, and even though I've never been terribly good at it, I love it to death. That being said, although the game is in many ways flawless, I have to say that the AI in single player mode is quite poor, actually. In the latter stages of the game, the enemy characters are Neo-like, able to effortlessly overcome anything you could possibly throw at them with their superior binary logic. On the flip side, they're also alarmingly easy to exploit. I'm sure other exploits are available, but my favourite one is to trap the opponent in a pattern. Throw them to the ground, leg it towards them, throw them to the ground, leg it towards them. You get the idea. It went a bit like this. So basically the AI are simultaneously invincible and thick as two short planks. The AI is the weakest of the original 3 games, and so as a single player experience at least, I'd actually say that 2 was the weakest entry. On a side note, the AI in Virtua Fighter 3 feels far more advanced, and along with the uneven surfaces, that most people hate incidentally, I find it to have the most replayable single player experience of the original 3 games. Anyway, if you play this game with a friend, it's just about flawless. And that's where its real genius lies.
Just to reiterate, all 3 of our contestants are going to try and get through without suffering one hit. If they get hit even once, they are out of the challenge. Hateem is going to go first. Best of luck, Hateem. Let's have the first fight. So Hateem will be playing against Lau. Hateem's in the blue. That's up here, the top left-hand corner of the screen. That's his energy bar. If that goes red at all, he is out of it. Derek.
Okay. Oh, switch and a back check. Punch on the ground. Defensive jump kick back. Switch. Back. Oh,
that's it. A KO already. Fantastic final move there, as you can see in the replay. Lau's energy completely gone. He bites the dust. Hateem safely through onto Gordon.
Virtua Fighter 2, much like its predecessor, was very successful for Sega, particularly in Japan. It became a major arcade hit, selling more than 40,000 arcade units worldwide at a cost of roughly £6,000 a pop, and became one of Sega's best-selling arcade games of all time. The Saturn version sold 1.7 million copies in Japan. In addition, it sold at least 500,000 copies in the US. Improving on the cutting-edge original game by almost every conceivable metric, Virtua Fighter 2 is arguably the ultimate product of this bleeding-edge, super-powered early 3D arcade machine era. The days in which you'd walk into an arcade and see these gigantic arcade cabinets, usually from Namco and Sega, with huge monitors, force feedback controls, ludicrous 3D graphics, and skis, and you get a visceral, eye-melting experience far beyond what you could get at home. It was an awesome, but sadly brief period of time, but when I plug this old PCB in and start inserting my Virtua coins, and it catches me in the right mood, I'm transported back to that unique and legendary flashpoint in the annals of our favourite hobby. Blue, blue skies I see.